Hey everybody, this is the end of the second to last week of this entire online course. So you have almost made it. Just keep doing your work and you should be fine. So we're actually going to shift gears a little bit when it comes to the overall government class. The end of the course is actually dealing with a little bit of basic economics. So that will be the next three lessons. We'll be dealing in some form or fashion with economic issues. So today is really a basic intro. What we're going to be talking about, really two things. Number one, the basic models of different economies that exist around the world regarding the government's role in those economies. And then we're going to be talking a little bit about the specifics of the American economy, and specifically the role that the government plays in managing and in many ways contributing to the economy. So we're going to dive in now. So when you are evaluating, what type of economy a different society has, for example, the American economy is fundamentally different than the Chinese economy. You're going to ask yourself a couple of fundamental questions. What's being produced, who's making the decisions, who's deciding what's going to be made, how much of it is going to be made, and for who are the items being produced. I guess I'm kind of assuming that you already have some basic knowledge of economics, things like buyers and consumers versus producers. So hopefully this is a little bit of a review. So one of the major models of types of economies that we see around the world is a free market economy. In a free market economy, the government has a very, very, very little role in making economic decisions and in terms of managing the economy. Almost every economic decision, the three kind of questions that we talked about, is going to be made by individuals, corporations, companies, so individual economic actors. The government's going to have little to no role when it comes to managing the economy. It's really based off of private property, competition, all of the things that we think of as kind of basic economics. Consumers decide what's going to be made. I'll talk about consumer sovereignty in a second. But bottom line, the government doesn't decide what gets made. That's up to individual companies. The government's not going to tell Coke or Ford or Apple or Microsoft or you name your company what to make or how to make it or how to make their decisions. It's going to be largely up to the businesses and ultimately to the consumer. I'll talk more about that in a second. And that contrasts rather dramatically with what we would call a command economy, or sometimes called a centrally planned economy. Now, there really aren't too many of these around the world. We tend to associate this, rightly so, with communism. So, in a communist command economy, the government is going to be making economic decisions. So, if you look at the Soviet Union under Lenin and under Stalin, or the Chinese government under Mao, and even a little bit today, the government's going to say, okay, we as a country are going to, produce this much of this much of this. As you can see a little bit from this chart, if my pen will work, that's not going to work apparently. But the chart on the left, I'm sure that's going to bother me. Okay, for some reason it's not cooperating today. But in any event, the government's going to be the one making economic decisions. If you look at the Soviet Union under Stalin, they would routinely tell farmers, like individual farmers, you will grow this much wheat, you will do this, you will make this much, you will meet this quota. The government would order factories, you will produce these things, this much of this many. They may have even given some directions. And the logic of that was the government can kind of plan and calculate how much is going to be needed um, by the consumers. We need this much wheat, this much, this many cars, this much of whatever. So they would try to plan it to avoid shortages and to make very efficient economic decisions. Um, Now I'm not supposed to get biased in this class, but I think it's kind of beyond refuting that centrally planned economies actually are not very good at planning these types of things. The Soviet Union was very, very well known for having shortages. They would run out of certain things. In many cases, the planning was very, very poor. They would sometimes tell farmers who had been growing wheat their entire for generations, they knew how to do that, to now grow radishes or to grow whatever. And frequently, they didn't actually meet the production goals that they said that they were trying to meet. And when that happened, there were shortages. So if a centrally planned economy is poorly planned, which frequently happens, then you're not going to have the type of economy that you need to have. So the free market is probably more efficient in terms of producing what is needed. And I'll talk about why in a second. So we have the free market, we have the commission, and then in the middle we have a mixed economy, which is what the United States is, and that's what most economies are. A mixed economy is kind of a combination between a free market economy, which has almost no role for the government, and a command economy, where the government controls almost everything. Now, one thing I will say is that it's called a mixed economy, but most mixed economies, and I'll try this again, it is just not working today, and I do not understand why. Okay, that's too bad. They are most mixed economies are much closer to a free market economy than to a command economy. So in the American economy, for example, the government does play a major role in making some economic decisions, but generally it's a free society. Most economic decisions are left up to individual companies, individual consumers. Um, so, we have a larger role for the government than a free market economy, which has almost no role. But the government doesn't make too many economic decisions. They provide for some economic decisions, or they provide some economic services, which I'll talk about in a second. The United States is a mixed economy. More on that now. So in the American economy, and kind of a mixed and a free market economy, the thing that kind of makes it go is competition. So, Coke and Pepsi, they are going to compete to each other or with each other in a number of different fronts to make the best soda. You're going to have Ford and GM compete to make the best car, and in a number of different fashions. And they can approach this from different directions, but both in terms of quality of what they are making or what they are offering to the consumer, and then also in terms of price. If I'm going to have, I have some trees outside over here. If I'm going to have tree work being done, there are many tree services out there. People will come out, and one thing that keeps them doing good work and also offering it at a reasonable price is the fact that if one person charges too much, I can go to another person. So competition, having different producers compete against each other, usually creates winners for the consumer. Profit businesses operate really to make money. You're going to produce a good, necessary good at a reasonable rate, and if you do a good job, you will make money on it. Obviously, we're kind of skipping over this, but these are fundamental ideas. And this is a big deal. This is a huge, huge, huge deal in terms of what drives a free market or a mixed economy, and that is consumer sovereignty. Ultimately, it's the consumer, you and me, that decide what gets made. And the way we actually decide what gets produced is we vote with our wallet. The government doesn't have to step in and to start, ordering companies to stop making certain goods or to start making others. If we consume certain goods, the reason they keep making Coke and Pepsi is because consumers keep buying Coke and Pepsi, right? I don't know if you guys will know this, but they used to make things called pagers, which were not quite a cell phone, but what they would do is it was a little device that would attach to your hip. And when you got a phone call, it would give you a message, and then you would have to call another number using a payphone. And they don't make pagers, or they're called beepers sometimes anymore. Ask your parents about that. They don't make these anymore, not because the government had to order companies to stop doing them, but because people stopped buying them when cell phones came out. So take any product, if the consumer doesn't buy it or stops consuming it, that company, because they're driven by profit, they want to make money, they're going to stop producing it. So consumers, based off of their purchasing habits, decide what gets produced. If Americans tomorrow all decided that we loved radishes, farmers who want to make money would start to plant more radishes because more people would be buying it, so the price would go up. So ultimately, we decide what gets made in a free market economy. Now, it's important to note that even though we are a mixed economy and the government does play a role, we are still a very, very, very free society, and our economy is still very, very free. Here are some details that make us, free. Some qualities. I'm going to skip over that because we are running out of time. Okay, so this is kind of the big deal. But what does the American government do in our economic system? And they do play a much larger role than you would in a libertarian or completely free market economy. So there are countless, countless, countless things that the American government does in the American economy. I have a little list right here. A lot of this comes down to regulation. Consumer protection, I have over here, our meat that is sold, any food that is sold in supermarkets, that is inspected, that is signed off on by the American government to keep consumers safe, to make sure that you're not going to eat meat that is packaged irresponsibly or in an unsafe method. So regulations exist largely, arguably, to protect the consumer, to keep us safe. They're not going to be able to sell products on the shelves that contain something that is poisonous, right? You're going to have inspections, you're going to have steps in place to keep people safe. There's regulations when it comes to the job market. Factory conditions are inspected. We have minimum wage to make sure that workers at least can have some sort of, possibly livable money that they make, although, that's actually hotly contested. The government also provides a lot of basic goods and services. The post office is a basic government service that exists for people. I can't imagine not having a postal service, which comes to my house pretty much every day. That's a government role. Police, firefighters, those are all government services. Me right now, I am a teacher offering a public education. That is a government service, which does not necessarily exist in every society. They protect the environment, so that we have clean air and clean water. And they even, like right now, we are in the middle of a recession. The government is going to take steps to try to control that, to try and limit it, and ultimately to try to bring the United States out of the recession. So this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some things that the government does to maintain the economy and ultimately to protect the consumer. So there's a lot going on here. The government has a pretty big role, and many of these things would not happen in a purely free market economy. But it's also worth noting the American government does not go so far as they would in a command economy. Kind of last thing, which I will leave you at, why does the government play a role in the economy? Or when should the government provide the service? And ultimately, here's a little list of criteria that should exist for the government to step in. Ultimately, keep people safe. And then I have a nice little list right here. Bottom line, it can be a lot more efficient for the people to pool their resources together through taxes to provide for common goods and services. Take, for example, schools. It makes much more sense for us as a community in James City and Williamsburg to pool our money, our resources together to create a public school service, as opposed to each individual family trying to hire a tutor to educate their children, for example. Imagine a county without a firefighter department. That would be insane. It's not like every family would have their own means to prevent fires. They would have to Now, I don't know how you would even do that. So we pool our resources together in order to provide that role. So I am out of time now, so I will leave you here. Again, I hope you guys are staying safe. Please let me know if you have any questions via email or through office hours.